Well, we know that altogether the Russians have 1 million soldiers. Some people say even 1.5 million soldiers in Ukraine. So 11,000 is not the biggest force, but you may not forget that many of them are dying. You may not forget that the Ukrainians are killing between, I think just in Pokrovsk and Myrnograd area, between 200 and 500 Russian soldiers are being killed every day. So the Russians have to send reinforcements always, every day, because many are killed of the attacking forces. So this is quite a lot they're having there. And second question was about the strategic implications. Well, to be very honest, I think the strategic role for Pokrovsk is very limited now for the Ukrainian army, because all the streets in and out, all the railways in and out, everything is cut. I mean, Pokrovsk is not a knot anymore. It's not a logistical knot, a hub anymore, like it was some 1 year ago. Like also Konstantinovka, where I visited so often. It was a little bit further to the northeast. It was a logistical hub. It was where the Ukrainian soldiers were even relaxing. It was where everyone was going to have a good time, not at the front line. And everything there is hell now. I mean, the city is almost destroyed by the Russians. So the strategic implications are very small for the Ukrainian army, I would say, but the symbolic implications are giant, of course. You can see this. Fortunately, no one called Pokrovsk a fortress like we saw in Bakhmut, but still losing another big agglomeration. And you may not forget that the agglomeration of Pokrovsk and Myrnograd together was more than 100,000 people. So that's a big area. I mean, that's a big also civilian area. Losing this is a symbolic big defeat, I would say. Otherwise, the Ukrainians wouldn't defend it, although they are semi-encircled there. And for the Russians, unfortunately, I think the strategic implications are better. If they capture Pokrovsk, and even if it's ruins, even if they have nothing to have a nice place, nothing to relax, but just the ruins to live in and to hide in, this will give them another boost, just like what we saw in Bakhmut or what we saw in Turets. This is where they can hide in the cellars, in the basement, where they can have their drone forces, where they can even have better logistics in terms of cars being able to go to the city limits from the eastern side, and then everything can be moved to the west by foot or in the darkness. So I think, unfortunately, right now, from a strategic point of view, it is more important for the Russians to capture it than for the Ukrainians to defend it. But symbolically, of course, Ukraine does not want, and the Ukrainian government does not need another big defeat here.
Julian, you said about logistic. What are the likely logistical and supply challenges facing not only Ukrainian forces in this area, but Russian? And what lessons from previous battles in eastern Ukraine could be applied to this situation? You mentioned Bakhmut.
Yeah. So first about the logistics, I think we have a 20-kilometer wide death area along the front line, going at least 10 kilometers to each side of the contact line. And it's just practical for both sides. These little kamikaze drones, the Ukrainians fortunately have millions of them. They are being used. And this is why most of the Russian vehicles are being destroyed, which are sent to the front lines, and also most tanks and infantry fighting vehicles. We have just seen this in Myrnograd and Shachove some days ago. Most of them, or at least half of them, are getting destroyed. So this is something which is true for both sides. Maybe you remember that it's hard to see any Ukrainian military vehicles close to the front line here recently. I've seen one BTR-4 of the Azov Corps in Röpcke, and this was the only vehicle I've seen there. Everything else is just far away from the front line, because the Ukrainian army knows if we are sending tanks like Leopard 2, Abrams, or if we are sending Marder infantry fighting vehicles from Germany, they will probably be destroyed. So this is true for both sides. The Russians don't care so much. That's why, and they also have more stuff. That's why they are sending in sometimes, I think 29 armored vehicles in Shachove some days ago. And they lost 12, I think. This is what the Ukrainians said. So 50% almost survived this, and they set down their infantry and went back. Why? Because the Russians were waiting. They were waiting for the bad weather period. It's not only bad weather on the ground when it comes to the ground situation, the swamps, but it's also bad weather in the skies, which means Ukraine cannot start so many drones. They can start them much later. You may not forget, as you know, I've just been with a Shark unit, a Ukrainian drone Shark unit. You can start an FPV kamikaze drone when the clouds are low, but you cannot see where the enemy is. You cannot have the Shark or the Quantum, what is it, Vector or something like this, or Fly. You cannot not have them in the air. Because they need at least 1,500 meters altitude of the clouds. If you don't have this, you cannot observe your enemy. So you just see it last minute when it almost approaches your position, and then you can start the kamikaze drones. So this is really bad there, I think, for both sides. And this is why also some hopes were premature, I would say, in the summer, saying the Russians don't have any more tanks. Of course they have more tanks. Of course they have many more fighting vehicles. They were just not used for many months because the idea was to save them for bad weather time, for when the Ukrainians cannot defend so well as they could in the summer. And now you can suddenly see again, after months of only infantry attacks, you can suddenly see again that every week, I think at least 50 to 100 Russian armored fighting vehicles are used, and at least half of them are getting destroyed.
Julian, about Kupiansk, fierce fighting continues in the Kupiansk area of the Kharkiv region, where Russian occupation forces are attempting to gain a foothold in the northern part of the city. However, reports of any encirclement of Ukrainian troops are unfounded. The Joint Forces Group reported this on Wednesday. What is the current tactical situation in the northern part of Kupiansk? How are Ukrainian forces maintaining their defensive positions amid the intensified fighting?
Yeah, also there's no real encirclement. This is absolutely true. There's no encirclement in Kupiansk. But of course, you have still some square kilometers east of the Oskil River under Ukrainian control. And if Kupiansk falls, so if all the bridges and even the pontoon bridges, if they are getting destroyed, then Ukrainian forces, not in Kupiansk, but east of the Oskil, in Kharkiv Oblast, they have a big problem there. So that's why Kupiansk is still strategic, and that's why it's also a dangerous situation. But yes, you were saying northern Kupiansk. I fear, and this is also confirmed by Deep State Map and other Ukrainian bloggers, I fear that Russian troops have been visible in the very western and also very much southern areas of Kupiansk. Again, everything only on the western side of the Oskil. On the eastern side of the Oskil, the Ukrainian defense is holding. But of course, just as in Pokrovsk, the Russians are attempting to go down and break through as much west as possible, because then the eastern troops are cut off. And this is their aim. So that's why we don't see so many attacks on the other side. Yeah, you can see on your map that the red one goes up to the center, up to the only bridges, and the gray area goes to the very south of Kupiansk. So in the end, we have the same problem as in Pokrovsk. There are not enough Ukrainian infantrymen. There is no real front line anymore. There is not a contact line where you can say the Russians are on the right and the Ukrainians are on the left. But instead, because of you have so many big holes, and sometimes it's kilometer-wide holes in the front lines where there are no Ukrainian units, as soon as the weather gets worse and you cannot have reconnaissance drones there over the whole time and see, okay, we don't have troops there, but we see the Russians moving, so we can kill them if they go there. If you don't have this anymore, and this is the situation right now, you can unfortunately, like in Kupiansk, like in Pokrovsk, see hundreds and hundreds of Russian troops going behind the Ukrainian line, and we just saw this, some war crimes in the center of Pokrovsk, attacking Ukrainian soldiers far behind the front and even killing the wounded, as we have seen this crime of at least one Russian soldier.